Okay, we're live, Chair.
Okay. Good evening, everyone.
Good evening.
You know this is being recorded, and just make sure you've got your mute and unmute buttons when you're speaking and when you're not. I don't think there's anything else. Remember that general public are listening to this as well. Are there any apologies for absence, Wendy?
No, Chair, we haven't received any apologies yet, but Councillor Spillman isn't here yet.
Okay, leave that one open then at the moment. Item 2, to approve the correct record of the minutes of the Local Development Plan Task Force on the 2nd of November. Has everybody read and happy with that one?
Yep.
Okay, thank you. Item 3, there aren't any items of urgent business that I know of. Any, Wendy?
No, Chair.
Okay, thank you. Is there any declarations of interest from anyone? No? Okay, thank you. We go into item 5, which is the Thurrock climate change strategy. Lee, can you to lead us into that?
Thank you, Chair. Good evening, members. So this paper provides an update on the work that the Council is doing in relation to the climate change agenda and how that work will feed into the new local plan for Thurrock. We have Ben, who is the head of climate change section at ARUPS, alongside officers this evening, who have prepared a presentation for members. Chair, with your agreement, I'd like to hand over to Ben for the presentation.
Thank you, Lee. Ben, nice to see you.
Thank you very much. I'll just share my screen now, if that's okay.
Yeah, of course it is. Thank you.
Okay, am I presenting full screen now? You can see the slides?
You are, yes, thank you.
Fantastic. All right, well, thanks very much for having us along. As was said, my name is Ben Smith. I'm a director at ARUP and I lead on energy and climate change consulting. And I'm here this evening with my colleague Lizzie Williams, who's also doing some work with Thurrock and was involved in this piece of work that I'm going to talk to you about tonight.
Okay.
This is a report that... Sorry, is that okay? Can you hear me?
Lizzie as well.
Hello, I'm here.
Yeah, welcome, Lizzie. So I was just asked along tonight, as I understand it, to give you a presentation of some work that ARUP did for you in the first quarter of 2020, which culminated in a report, which was the Thurrock Climate Change Scoping Study. It sort of took stock of where you're at with climate change so far, some decisions that were made by the Council in October 2019, and provided some recommendations on the next steps. So the report is available for you to look at, and this is just a summary presentation of that. So I might refer back to the full report as I go through the slides. But yeah, I'm just going to describe the work we did. And also, I think I'll show you a few things which have happened, pieces of work that we've done since then, which might be relevant to your thinking as you go forward. And I'd like to just say that a lot of the work that was done on this report was actually done not by myself, but by the broader team, and including my colleague Laura Frost, who's recently gone on maternity leave. So just in terms of the scope of the study, as I said, you guys resolved a motion in October 2019 to declare a climate emergency and to request that the council's activities become zero carbon by 2030. There was a request that the council embed that work in all areas that you take responsibility for to reduce emissions as quickly as possible, including within the direct sort of operational control of the council. There was also a request that a relevant portfolio holder was assigned for each department, and that you convened a citizens' assembly on climate change as well. So we were appointed as a sort of as straight after that, really. So that was October. We were commissioned in the early part of the following year, 2020, and the scope of the study is on the slide here for you all to see. So we undertook a baseline assessment of your current emissions. So that's the greenhouse gas emissions that are emitted within the borough of Thurrock, and also the climate risks and hazards. So that's where the climate change might impact on the operations of the council, or more broadly within the boundary of the area that you look after. So not necessarily the council's own operations, but within the community or within business and industry. We looked at the corporate documents that are already existing to outline where there's already relevant policy in place that has a bearing on either reducing emissions or responding to climate risk. And we did that both nationally, but also very specifically in Thurrock. And there's a quite detailed table in the report which sets out all the different policy areas and where those policies that would be worth having a look at in the context of climate change. And then we made a series of recommendations for next steps. We set out a bit of a route map for where you need to go to next, with some key decisions along the way. And we identified how you might structure your climate plan given what we know or what we gained, what we gathered around Thurrock from doing this piece of work. So just to give you a bit of a summary then, and I'm sure many of you will be well aware of this, in terms of the high level picture of where emissions come from in the borough. I mean, the pie chart there describes a fairly equal split between stationary energy and transport emissions. And I think the key thing that we noted is how much of the transport emissions within the Thurrock come from on-road vehicular transport, which is perhaps no surprise given what you know of your of the road infrastructure that is around you where you are there. It's worth saying that overall emissions in Thurrock have been falling since 2005 due to a fall in industrial emissions. But obviously we need to look at pressing that further as we want to get towards zero carbon by 2030. What I put on this slide, by the way, is the greenhouse gas emissions from Thurrock for the whole area. We did also look at some reporting of greenhouse gas emissions that are in the direct control of the council. And I think the overall conclusion of that work is that it was hard for the consultancy team to find any clear trends because there'd been some changes about how things had been reported over the previous period. Some of that work had been outsourced, and there wasn't complete clarity in the areas that you might then sort of look to make reductions in going forward. So, for example, transport data wasn't always collected, but there was also a number of measures a number of programs which are positive, which the council had progressed around LED streetlights and so on. And a lot of this is detailed in the Thurrock Carbon Management Plan, but that hadn't been produced for a while when we did this piece of work. So it's, as I say, I think there's a little bit of work still required to better understand where the opportunities are in relation to your corporate emissions. So we generally consider both the whole of council emissions for the whole area, and then we consider essentially where you can take leadership through the actions that the council has direct control of, and that's what I'm describing here. On the slide there, you're just seeing the area-wide emissions. I hope that makes sense. The report also looked at climate risks and hazards, and again, this won't be a surprise to any of you who live and work in Thurrock. Flooding quite clearly came through as the top one, and the report details the number of properties at risk from flooding in different areas, and the different pieces of infrastructure that are also at risk of flooding. There were some other climate risks as well, particularly around extreme weather just generally, so frost and ice, but also a hotter summer, which is a trend that is all too familiar for us now in terms of how the average temperature, mean summer temperature, is increasing year on year going forward, and that's projected to continue, and so therefore we're going to have to be thinking about providing cool spots or cooling in buildings as summer temperatures. I know it's difficult to imagine today, but summer temperatures are due to get hotter as we go forward. As I said at the beginning, the report broke down all the different areas for which you have policy already set out, which has a bearing on either emissions reduction or climate risk. These are the two sides of the coin that we always talk about when we're thinking about climate. And there's a table in Appendix B of the report, which goes through sort of policy by policy with a sort of red, amber, green traffic light system to say these are the areas that either need attention, are okay, or somewhere in the middle. Chair, please stop me if I'm going too fast or slow. If there's anything that you want to question, sure.
Well, I'm writing mine down. Would you rather have the questions at the end when we're finished?
Yeah, that'd be brilliant.
Yeah.
If you don't mind.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you very much. So then there were five main recommendations that came out of the report, which I think are fairly clear, and I know that some of them you're already making progress on. It'd be good to get into the discussion later to hear how far progressed these are. But first one was really to identify all the key stakeholders that might be involved in developing a full climate strategy for Thurrock. Think what role that they might have and how you might consult with them. It was important to take on board the kind of data that, although I've only shared very quickly today, the report has a bit more of that in it. So take on board that sort of baseline and make sure your strategy responds to the local context that you all know and understand. I think that's obviously a key point, but it's worth saying because the emissions profile in each different council around the country is different, and so as is the makeup of the place. So you need to make sure the strategy responds to the sort of context of Thurrock. You also need to think about how it responds to the national policy, and that is evolving very fast. And many of you probably would have seen through the course of November, December last year, so almost a year after the work that we did for you, there was a number of central government documents put out around climate change. Boris Johnson launched his 10-point plan on the green recovery. There's also the 6th carbon budget, which was released by government as well. So these are developments that have happened since we did the work for you, but are really important to consider in how you bring your strategy forward. And that the strategy highlights sort of routes to action. It's very easy to kind of come up with a document which has got a long list of things that you need to do, and just to leave it like that. There need to be an accountability and a time scale applied to each of the actions, and understanding amongst the core group who's doing what and by when, and that really comes through in the final point there around timescales and accountability. We often see strategies developed that aren't where there isn't enough focus on the accountability and the stakeholders that are going to take forward those actions. We suggested these areas, given what we read about Thurrock, as being the key areas that you might frame your climate strategy around. So that's integrating development or land use and transport. It's about buildings, and I guess most clearly about building retrofit, which we know is a big opportunity UK-wide, but in Thurrock as well for reducing emissions. Retail and industry, given what we know of Thurrock as a place and the sorts of businesses that exist there. Infrastructure, environment and natural resources, and waste. So they're the sort of areas around which we saw that there were emissions. We know that there are these kind of activities happening with Thurrock, and we thought this was a sort of sensible structure to take forward in terms of the climate plan.
Ben, could I interrupt you there? Could you just go back?
Of course.
It's good to see that these pictures, that last picture you've got, probably not many people in Thurrock know it's there.
Well, I must be honest with you, I only found out myself this afternoon.
Right. I was at the thing of designing that. And when I went to visit it wasn't as big as I assumed it was going to be. But there are many people in Thurrock who do not even know that's there. And it is beautiful the way it's been done. It's been built so you can see out, but nobody can see in. So I just wanted to make that, that these aren't just pictures, these are actually places in Thurrock.
Yeah, I mean, the work of the Wildlife Trust is fantastic, and that looked like a great visitor attraction. And I thought I'd put that there because I guess I don't know this for sure, but I imagine, given what I've read about Thurrock, that you might easily gravitate towards sort of heavy industry and roads and ports and so on. Whereas actually, I think we've put green infrastructure in here as or natural resources, and I think it's right that there should be some focus on that as well.
Thank you.
The end part of our report produced this kind of route map to climate action. And it's a very simple kind of document, but I hope it's kind of useful in thinking through the steps that you might need to take to get to an agreed strategy. And the different colours on the diagram there sort of point to some of the things that I've talked to you about already in this presentation and that we know is happening in the background. So on the top there, you're talking about the national and regional initiatives, and you'll all be aware that there's a big conference that's planned in November in Glasgow this year for climate change internationally, which is going to, I think, bring quite a spotlight into climate action in the UK. and in the run up to that, there's bound to be lots of other events too. The UK has, as I said before, launched a series of documents stating its ambitions for the country in December. There was a summit that was led by Boris Johnson in early December, bringing together leaders from around the world on this agenda. Now, I know that you're all working on the local plan for Thurrock, and that is a process which obviously needs to kind of bring in the climate change aspects into it. So it's really just thinking about where those opportunities are to do that. In terms of the climate change work itself, this work I'm talking about was an initial scoping piece. I know that there's an intention on your side to kind of do more, to follow up on some of the recommendations. And we're seeing already a number of sort of related studies that you're procuring that sort of, I think, tie into this in different areas. And then obviously once the strategy is released, and the target date for that on this diagram at least is at the end of this year in 2021. But the important thing is once you've got that strategy in place, you then get on with working with partners to deliver it, and that's the process between now and 2030. And what we said is that whilst that's the sort of overall ambition, there were a few key points that needed to happen immediately. This is obviously back nearly a year ago now to make that happen. And the first of those was to make sure you had the right leadership buy-in, to make sure you have the best available data, both on emissions and climate risk and other associated things such as vulnerable populations, downstream cascading risks to different type of industries in the area, stakeholders and so on. The third point here was just that stakeholder engagement and understanding the powers. What I mean by that is a sort of, I think it's a climate change term, but what we mean is it's not just mapping who the stakeholders are, but how they can all have an influence or control on this particular agenda around climate change. So should they just be informed, or are they actually an actor who is going to be investing, and or do they do outreach? So, who are they and what are their powers? And then the final point there is just to agree this program or something similar to it. I put this slide in here because I intend to share these slides with you afterwards. And as I've said a few times through the presentation, there's quite a lot happened since last April. So if you haven't seen it already, there's a fantastic new report that's been released by the Climate Change Committee called Local Authorities and the Sixth Carbon Budget. So it's a really nicely put together report which sets out the role of local authorities on the climate change agenda in the UK. And I would suggest it's well worth a read. I read it myself just last week. As I've mentioned a few times, there's a number of different national level plans that have been produced in the last few months. And I put a link here to a site that we manage at Arup for the Towns Fund, where I produced a few blogs to give people a bit of an update on the changing policy. And I thought because one of the climate risks that came out through the work in Thurrock was the risks to schools, I've just linked you to a report that we've recently finished for the Greater London Authority about climate adaptation in schools in London. And I did note earlier on that one of the councillors was a teacher, so perhaps there's a relevance there as well. And I'm going to finish by just saying there's also, I think, an important piece of work to make sure that the work you're doing in all the different parts is connected up. Now, I know that Lizzie is working with you on the infrastructure plan. I know that other colleagues of mine in Arup have recently put a proposal to Thurrock around an energy strategy for the council, for the area as a whole. And we see in these national level government documents, them looking for pilot areas to do more innovative things around energy, particularly hydrogen. And we know that around you there's quite a lot of interest in blue hydrogen production on the Isle of Grain, and then potentially piping that in. And I think there's a sort of opportunity, and I know I think Thurrock with a number of other organisations are currently looking at tendering some work on this. But I think there's an opportunity through the local plan process to think, well, what might we best use the hydrogen for in Thurrock, given that we know how much is going to be produced on this site and the use and the draws on that from other places. What might be right for Thurrock, and maybe that's about some specific industrial uses or some transport applications. I don't know, but I think it's worth considering. So I was going to finish by just saying, there's a lot to sort of link up, and I think the climate change piece, cuts across in all these different directions. So it's important just to keep those connections alive. So yeah, that was me. I'm here if you want to ask any questions. I'll be pleased to have a chat.
Ben, could you just leave that last slide up for a minute?
Sure.
I mean, we all know Shell and the National Grid. I presume that's Shell's logo, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. Yeah.
The Drax and the Uniper and SSE Thermal, I've never heard of, but obviously they're people that do work in the industry, but that doesn't mean anything to me. But,
Sure. No, happy to. So, sorry to cut across you.
all right.
Yeah. No, just to say, I wasn't. Yeah, fair point. I didn't necessarily expect people to recognise these logos. I guess the thing I was sort of pointing out is that colleagues of mine, I've spoken to two other teams in Arup today. So our team did the climate report for you guys, and I've spoken to two other teams. One of them is recently put a proposal into Thurrock around energy strategy, and another one is working on a project called Project Cavendish, which brings together all these partners for which I put the logos up here. And they're all investing their own money in a proposal that looks at producing blue hydrogen on the Isle of Grain and then piping that into different places around the region for storage and for use. And so I thought, it would just be useful to put it on your radar that that's happening. I know that there's an organisation, is Thames Estuary Hydrogen Group, who's also looking at this. So I guess the area around you seems to be a bit of a focus area for the deployment of hydrogen energy infrastructure and applications. And so, I don't know a huge amount about this project, if I'm completely honest, because I'm not working on it myself. But I guess the point here was just all this is going on around you, and from a local plan making process, how can you connect to it?
Yeah, no, that's brilliant. I mean, we've got most of us have been around a little while, and I think we've got a great asset there on the Thames estuary. If we all look across to Gravesend, we see that they've done a great deal, on people looking back this side thinking we're not doing a great deal, because I think we're losing that what we could do with the estuary and how we could take off some of the emissions. We've already got it with the Thames clippers that may be coming. That'd be a good thing to get cars off the road, get people travelling up to the river, to London. That's a great way of doing it. My only other sight on that was to say that what we're trying to do, we've done a lot of good in the borough at the moment. We're planting trees, and I think we've done well over 1,000 new trees. But I think some of the projects that are coming forward from developers need to be a bit better in their green spaces and to give people somewhere to walk, because it seems to me at the moment it's get as many properties as we can in a part of whatever development they're going to do, and then we don't think about the environment after. We think about that afterwards. So it's good to see that sort of coming through, for me anyway. I'd like to see a bit more of that.
Yeah, no, it's an area that I'm personally really passionate about, and I do a lot of work outside of my day job around promoting green infrastructure, but also it's kind of interesting, isn't it, how in lockdown we also depend on our green spaces around us to kind of get out and have a bit of a break, and I think it's really coming into people's focus that, that's really important.
I think it's always been there for some of us, the motion I put in for the trees, and every old tree that comes down, we put one back in, so we replace. We don't just take trees down anymore, we do replace, and that is ongoing. So that is a good thing within Thurrock. What I did notice today was going down to Tilbury Ferry, that we've got an awful lot of flooding in the area now, whether it's because of everything that's being built down in Tilbury. It's now the water's got to find its way out another route, and knowing quite a bit about the river as I do, it's that little piece where the flow of the normal outlets to the river are being blocked off. So water's saying to itself, well, we've got to find another way out now.
Yeah.
That's where we're getting. I was shocked at the amount of water that is down there at the moment, and that is something we need. That climate change, we need to look at that as well. Are we putting too much in Tilbury and we're not giving the natural flow of the water. That's to get out to the Thames some way.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, I know one of my first jobs a long time ago now was at the Environment Agency, and I know they do a lot of work around, as you will know as well. And so it's interesting when you start to think about your stakeholders, like who do you need to be involved to be able to provide really great advice on what the flood risks are around Thames and the other tributaries and the defences and so on, and what different properties is at risk. I mean, there's a huge amount of work that gets done on that, and it's just about making sure you've got the right data and you're building that into your plan making process locally.
Definitely. That's why I mentioned about the Wildlife Centre. It's out of the way and nobody really sees it. It isn't marketed very well, so nobody really knows it's there. It probably, as it's a smallish building, it's meant to be a lot bigger than that. It's a place for people to still walk. Though you probably can't use the building at the moment, but it is a place where people can park and walk. It's quite a nice area. Okay, enough of me. Does anybody else want to come in?
Councillor Rice has his hand raised.
Councillor Rice?
Yes, Chair. Ben, a very interesting presentation. I reflect on the domestic homes properties and the government's desire to get rid of, remove gas central heating by a specific date and combination boilers to be ceased, etc. Who will pay for this? Because ordinary people who have a home, lots of them might be retired, won't have £10,000 or £15,000 to pay. So is the government of the day, whether it's this government or another government, going to pay this money so that this will be converted?
Yeah, it's a really great question, and one that I don't think we know the answer to yet, if I'm honest, Councillor Rice, as you probably may have guessed. And the one thing which strikes me about that is in reading the government's most recent plans around how they plan to decarbonise the country, there is a lot of emphasis on removing what they call residual gas in homes, and there is a huge amount of emphasis given to replacing all of that with hydrogen. I would just say that there's an awful lot we can do in homes before we have to strip out their gas, the gas mains, because there's a huge number of homes which are very leaky from an energy efficiency point of view. There can be a massive amount of refit programs, and at Arup we're doing quite a lot of work at the moment to kind of think about modular solutions of overcladding homes with installation on the outside that can then be rendered, and you can do all the reveals around windows and ceilings and so on, so that, or rather roof parapets, so that you can do something which is replicable and scalable quite quick. Now, I don't know how far in the future it's going to be before we have to start seriously ripping out gas systems and replacing them with different air source heat pumps or hydrogen systems. But yeah, you're right. I mean, that there is a bit of cost associated with that. Having said that, I mean, we are working already on a scheme called High for Heat, which is the government's pilot scheme for hydrogen homes. So we do, we're testing the safety of using those systems, and we'll be able to tell you, what, or not me, but my colleagues would be able to tell you what it does cost at the moment. But of course, we would expect that to get cheaper as you start scaling up in the future. Any other questions?
No questions by the looks of it. Would have thought there would have been a lot tonight, Councillor.
Are you on? Yeah.
Just one other. You mentioned about Tilbury and flooding. I mean, I sit on the Environment Agency, the Coastal Protection, the Flood and Coastal Protection Committee for East Anglia. And Tilbury has achieved an awful lot in the past years. An example, we had £4.5 million put in for the East Dock sewer system, which pumps water away from Tilbury. A further 1.5 million on the World's End pumping station being totally renewed again, and that pumps water away. They spend £500,000 a year clearing all the ditches and dikes. And also there's the new floodgate that the Port of Tilbury are constructing with the Environment Agency, and that's in excess of 10 million. So there's a fair amount going on. And of course, I haven't alluded also to the new barrier at Purfleet, when we have to put up the flood defence measures on the walls by up to 2 metres. So there's a lot of work going on, and a lot of people probably are not au fait with it, but there's a huge amount of protection, not just for Tilbury, but for the lower part of Grays as well. And I wouldn't like people to run away with the idea that, we don't have a lot going on. But there is, and I can assure you of that. And that's the good news. So we are relatively well protected. We can always be better. That would be my take on it.
Definitely.
Yeah,
Thanks.
I think that's a point really worth making. And the other, and as I was saying, that it's not just, there are so many agencies, working on behalf of us all, right, to do that protection. So it doesn't all fall on the council clearly. But yeah, I guess for this conversation, we're just talking about the actions the council itself can take.
Wendy, I did see another hand go up, but I can't remember who it was.
No, that was Councillor Rice before.
There was somebody else put it. Was it
No,
Councillor Jeffries? No?
there's no other hands right now.
Okay.
There's Lee.
Yep, Lee.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, there's no more questions. It was just to come in just with an overriding comment, I guess, in that I think climate change really needs to be, I think, embedded into our approach to placemaking. And this is about conscious decision making and ensuring that the local plan is a blueprint for truly sustainable growth. And I think that's, and we weren't talking about blueprint. I mean, we're looking about homes and businesses which are located in the right place and with the right supporting infrastructure, and whether that's electric vehicle charging points, whether it's access to green and blue assets. I think it's important that it's not seen in isolation, and this is something which we've spoken about at Task Force and at PTR and also Planning Committee as well, in that these various strategies and studies which are being pulled together need to be in the context of others. And as Ben just mentioned, there's work going on the energy strategy. We have the transport strategy, economic development needs work. It all comes together to build up that picture to make sure that we're making informed choices about where development should be going within the borough. And that sort of common theme running through all of that is sustainability, and with that, climate change. So I hope that was of use to members, just as that sort of snapshot in time as to where we are with this piece of work and how that fits in with the wider work that we're doing with the local plan.
Thank you, Lee. Yeah, I think it's we've all got to be aware of what we're building, where we're building it, how we're building it. What I don't want to see is a lot of words, on agendas and on slides that we don't fulfill. We need to take that plan through. Just looking around the borough the other day, just looking at the Chadwell council houses that have just gone up. It's really good. There's a lot of greenery there. It's in Councillor Rice's ward, and it looks really nice for a change. To see a council development built like that is really lovely. Just hope it sustains, and stays in that way. But it's really good. It's really good to see the council actually fulfilling something, with a developer, whatever. Councillor Rice?
There we go. Yes, Chair. Ben, we get on to the subjects of cars, which is probably the nearest thing we're going to get, apart from housing, to influencing everyone's daily life. And the government got a great desire to tell us all to use electric cars. But again, who pays for it? Because most people haven't got £35,000 to go and buy, a hybrid, a battery-powered car. And the thing is, at the moment, what we're not doing, we're doing a little of it on our planning stage of new homes, but we need to do more, is the charging leads, etc. But I'd be interested on who will pay for those replacements of the cars, because if the government is serious, there has to be a scrappage scheme of some description. I'd be welcome your thoughts on that.
Ben?
Yeah, sure. Well, first of all, maybe just to say to the point that Lee made, I really hope that I conveyed that same sort of thrust through the presentation that I gave, because I was just presenting it through the climate change lens tonight, but what I tried to sort of articulate is that these areas of emissions and climate adaptation, they touch on everything else that you're doing, whether it's placemaking, infrastructure strategy, local plan. So yeah, I really hope that point came across. And similarly, as you look at the energy strategy, then there's a huge part of that which is about reducing emissions. So these things all interconnect, and they need to be thought of together as much as you possibly can. In terms of Councillor Rice's question on cars, very much following a sort of similar vein to the gas networks in the homes, you're right. I mean, the government have said no more internal combustion engine cars now by 2030. So there has to be a plan put in place to make that a reality, which would include, you would imagine, some sort of tax incentive, some sort of scrappage scheme and all of that. And most of the feedback that I've seen on the proposals that they've released in the last few months is, yeah, look, this is really good, but we need the further detail to answer the sorts of questions that you've just outlined there. The point around integrating the charging points is also a really interesting point, because obviously you've got lots of different distribution networks and distributors who are managing the electricity supplies. You've also got different, I suppose, different pulls in terms of the type of infrastructure that's being advocated for. So some are sort of promoting the supercharge 15 minutes charging on the sort of perimeter of the M25, where people can stop in, have a cup of coffee, get recharged and go. Whereas what I'm hearing from a lot of electric vehicle providers, so to answer your question about where the investment's coming from, and I know for a fact that Volkswagen are underpinning a lot of the electric car sharing schemes that are happening in London at the moment. And what I got from talking to them was, actually those supercharging points on the edge of town are not really that helpful for them, because what they need, they don't want to basically pick up their shared cars in the middle of town, drive them all the way out to a charging centre and come back. So they're actually advocating for the complete opposite, which is lots of little trickle things, perhaps in the bottom of lampposts in streets, which is definitely possible. So you've got these sort of competing different narratives, and I think we need to kind of work on a plan that addresses all of those points. So a bit of a waffly answer, but basically, in simple terms, you're right. There needs to be a lot more detail about who pays, when, and how, and we expect that to materialise over the next year or so.
Thank you, Ben. No, it's good point Councillor Rice made, really. I mean, a lot of people make long journeys, when we can, and you don't really want to stop in the middle of one for half an hour or an hour to charge up a car, do you? You want to actually get to the point you're going to. So I think it's 2030 is a long way, not that far away really, but
Sorry, I just had a thought about something I should have said in response to Councillor Rice's point as well. And this does feel like a difficult point to make in the middle of a lockdown when none of us have been anywhere for ages. But of course, the thing that comes before switching from ICE cars to electric vehicles is actually just taking those journeys out totally and actually promoting walking and cycling. So what I guess the point about what we really want to be seeing is less cars on the road overall. Even electric cars still have environmental impacts. So the first priority is to reduce the number of cars in operation in total before we then think about switching modes from internal combustion engine to electric. So, and again, that is something that can be promoted heavily through the local plan and is within your control. Development sites with really easy access, permeability for walking, cycling, navigation, signage, and all of those sorts of things to make it easy for people to move around, cycle around. That's probably higher up the hierarchy than worrying about the switch to electric vehicles.
Yeah, I think we obviously need to use that river more, Ben.
Yeah, that too. Yeah,
I'm probably one of those people that have been trying to get that for a long time, because the ferry sometimes doesn't run like it didn't today. I didn't see it running much today, but we need to get people. That's the only way. We're not going to stop people using cars to go shopping. That is definitely. You know, if you've got 2.2 going shopping, they are not going to get on a bus, you know, and they're not going to cycle because they just can't carry everything back. But I think what we've been in at the moment with the pandemic we've been in, it's going to make more people shop online, and it's going to be more shopping online. Whether that will produce more lorries on the road, I hope not. But I think it will produce that you do it less. You know, I hope so. I hope that this pandemic makes us all think a little bit more. You know, what we're doing, is it necessary? You know, do we need to go shopping every day, or do we need to go once a week? You know, so I think we've got to look at it like that. I just hope that we take something from this. You know, we don't just go back to living normally, and we take something away from it.
Yeah, I mean, I think you're right there. You know, I mean, it's definitely feels less easy to make that point now, but certainly in the first lockdown, there were lots of things that people were saying actually that there are positives from it that we need to try and hold on to. And actually, you know, I was just thinking the point around, you know, this last mile delivery, online shopping that we're all sort of using now, I guess. You know, in some senses, you know, there must be a certain efficiency. There must be certain efficiency you can strive for in terms of getting freight consolidated and then delivered out to homes for that last mile, and then, you know, electric vehicles to do the last mile. And actually, you know, talking to my colleagues earlier about that project I just referred to, Project Cavendish, I was trying to understand what they're advocating as the real benefits for it, because blue hydrogen still produces carbon. What they're saying is, you know, we'll have one place where we produce all the blue hydrogen, we'll extract the carbon in that process, and then what we deliver to the industrial sites at the other end of the pipeline will be clean hydrogen, where the carbon's already removed. Flip side of that is that you pipe it around with the carbon still in it, and everybody has to extract the carbon at their different sites. So a lot of this, you know, as we get on this journey towards zero carbon, there's going to be a lot of steps along the way. Some of the first ones are just purely just efficiency points, you know, just how can you get the best bang for your buck, as it were.
Yeah, definitely. Well, I mean, we've got petrol and diesel travelling up the M25 underneath the roads, so it's all those sort of things that have to get there, because they have to get to petrol stations, you know. But I think we all don't know what we're travelling over, you know.
Yeah, utilities.
Yeah, utilities that are underneath the ground. Lee.
Thank you, Chair. It's just coming back on Councillor Rice's point around the need for electric vehicle charging infrastructure. And perhaps we can circulate this to members, but in December, I think it was around the beginning of December, we took a report to PTR Overview and Scrutiny, which set out proposals for electric vehicle charging infrastructure across the borough. And that's with the concept of that was to procure a contract with a provider. I think the contract was around 15 years to provide infrastructure all over the borough, and this was based upon demand-led approach for on-street and off-street on council-owned assets and on the adopted highways. So we see that as being a really significant step forward in providing that infrastructure in the borough to encourage that shift from petrol and diesel vehicles onto electric vehicles, knowing that one of the blockers, one of the barriers for people purchasing those vehicles is charging facilities. So I'll pick up with Wendy, and perhaps we can circulate that for members just for information, really.
That would be good, Lee, because not everybody's got the facilities to put one in their own home. You know, it's so awkward. Even places like Impulse Leisure, our car park, that's a place where we could have something. You know, it's all those Lakeside. I don't know whether there are any down Lakeside. Are there any, Lee? Lakeside anywhere?
There's a handful probably in the Lakeside Basin, but exactly the point that was just being discussed. If people are out and about and shopping, then they can plug in, and there's a different lots of different options in terms of the actual charging infrastructure itself and the type of chargers. So it's providing that range of options for people so they can make an informed decision.
Oh, definitely. Thank you, Lee. Cheers. Does anybody else want to come in? Sean, did you want to come in on anything?
I was just thinking as the presentation went on and sort of the things that Ben was saying, sort of in a way it does relate to the future work programme is that when we take a report to the next meeting of the task force, we'll be setting out how the plan's going to be developed and what it will look and feel like. And obviously climate change is one of those golden threads, just like health and well-being that we've discussed previously at the group, green and blue infrastructure. And so what we want to do is actually show you the sort of the policy menu based on what Ben has said in terms of how we're going to address climate change and health in terms of adaptation. So I think, there's a lot of things that Ben said, and what we want to do is try and show in a very practical way how the plan will build upon these early task force meetings and upon the various presentations you've seen over the last year and a half.
Thank you, Sean. Councillor Rice?
Yes, Chair. Question for Lee, actually. Lee, I mean, we talked about the car charging. Really, what we need to be doing now is all these new developments coming through. We should be putting something in place where at least they've got something there, whether it's within the development itself, and I'm talking about the actual homes, or whether it's the lampposts outside of the homes. But we need to put something in place so that, the chair talks about 2021 and 2030, what Ben alluded to. 2030 will go like that. It's 9 years. It's not a long time.
No.
And if we haven't got those things in place in our planning profiles, with our applicants now coming forward, I mean, I can think of one. We might well get an application in Balvin for 900 homes. And in that 900 homes, we should at least have 900 charging points, because they're the very people that will be able to afford to actually have those and have the electric cars without a government subsidy, if you can follow what I'm saying, Lee.
Thank you, Chair. Well, absolutely. I think in terms of the charging facilities, as you probably know, sitting on planning committee, increasingly we have been imposing conditions on consents with the requirement for developers to put vehicle charging points within those developments. And I think there has been a change or a shift in developers' sort of attitudes towards this as well, because maybe not too long ago, if we had asked a developer to do that, they would have, maybe it would have been quite difficult for them to see the benefits of it. But I think now that is, I think everyone is seeing that is the future, and that's what's going to be expected when you buy a new home in the future. That will just become part of that sort of overall package.
Right, Wendy, can you see anyone?
Yes, Councillor Anderson.
Anderson, I thought it was. Yeah. Councillor Anderson? Thank you, Wendy.
Thank you, Chair. It was just a really brief comment, and that was to echo a point that Councillor Rice has made a couple of times regarding cost. Obviously, with the car example, a lot of working people rely on their car to get to work to make a living. And there will be those in 2030 and leading up to 2030 that won't be able to afford to move to electric. And I just think it's really important that we ensure it's, not working people that, have to pay over the top for anything like that. I'm not suggesting that anyone in this meeting tonight has suggested that, but I think it's a really important discussion to have.
No, it's good. Yeah, it's good. Thank you. Ben?
Yeah, Chair, can I just come in on that point? I mean, cost is really obviously a really important thing to always think about, and I don't think any of us want to see the people who can least afford it sort of impacted the most. But generally speaking, whenever we're doing any kind of work like this with climate change, we always try and integrate what we call a benefit story as well. So the thing is that there is a capital cost to retrofitting someone's home for energy efficiency, but there's also an operational benefit. They will be paying less for their energy bills going forward, which means that if they're living in fuel poverty because they're struggling to pay their fuel bills now, those bills will be lower in the future. And I think for almost every action in a climate plan. Of course, there will be costs associated, but there's also a benefit story, and you've got to think about those benefits to the individual. So, when you're proposing, tree planting, as you talked about earlier on, that has a benefit in sequestering carbon. It has a benefit in potentially absorbing or helping attenuate some floodwater, but it also just is nice for people to walk past, and it gives them a sense of well-being. So I think in every action, you've got to try and build in that story about the benefits as well as the costs.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you, Ben. No, that's a good point. Does anybody else want to come in? No? Okay. Where is this going, Wendy? Is this going to the task force and then to planning and regen, or is that its next step? Or Lee, can you tell us that?
Thank you, Chair. No, this is not making its way to PTR. So this is, as I say, a snapshot in time to update members as to where we are with this particular piece of work. The next steps is touched upon in the agenda in the cover report for this, which basically sets out the next step is developing up the strategy in full. Then that will join the suite of other documents that underpin and will basically form the local plan itself. So as we go on further, obviously we'll bring back updates on the various things that we're doing, so that then members of the committee can start to see how all this sort of ties together.
So we will have updates every now and again.
Yeah, that's the idea. Yeah.
No, that's brilliant. It's brilliant. Did Izzy want to come in at all?
No, thank you for the opportunity today.
No?
All covered by
Okay.
Ben. But we're progressing sort of our infrastructure plans as well. Second half will come at the end of the year, and climate change is one of those sections too.
Brilliant. Thanks for all your hard work. Ben, thanks for all your hard work as well. We just want to see a lot of it coming to fruition now, and perhaps this is the change we need. We need to bring more greenery in. We need to bring, so it's just not housing development. There is something else. Years ago, as Councillor Rice and I both know, when places were built, parks were built, and that's what we seem to be losing partly control of at the moment. We're both lucky probably to still have green stuff about, but I just want to see a lot of this come to fruition, with all your hard work. So it's brilliant.
Great. Yeah, I think we do too. So yeah, if there's anything we can do to help, just feel free to drop us a line.
Lovely. Thank you very much. Do you want to add anything else, Lee? Are you all right?
Okay. No, that's great. Thank you, Chair.
Okay. Wendy, I think all that's left on ours is the work programme, isn't it?
Yes, Chair.
There's nothing on there either. 8th of March is our next one, yes?
Yes, Lee's got his hand up.
Lee?
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I'm conscious of the work programme. I'm also conscious it's quite a light agenda this evening. So what we're looking to bring forward to the next meeting would be, well, actually, as Sean mentioned, an overview of the local plan work programme, a practical look at how all of the nuts and bolts fits together and how the different studies fit together. An update on the design charrette work, which is rolling out now, and also an update on the transport strategy work. And a new item for the committee would be a parking strategy and parking standards document, which we're looking to bring forward. So hopefully it'll be quite a busy agenda for March.
Yeah, so that's coming back on the March one, the 8th of March, yeah?
That's right, yeah.
Definitely. Thank you, Lee. May I ask Councillor Kerrin?
Thank you, Chair. I raised my hand just before Lee started speaking, and as he said everything, I just want to say that's really what I was going to ask for, a bit of a meatier agenda. And as Lee was speaking, I was sort of ticking off my list all the things I was going to ask for at the meeting. So thank you, Lee, and I look forward to that meeting.
Yeah, it should be quite a good one, actually.
Yeah,
nice.
yeah,
we need some meat, don't we, on the bones, definitely. The sports facilities, Grays Athletic, Wendy, do we know when they're coming to, what meeting they're coming to? at all?
Chair, this is something I'll need to discuss with officers,
Okay.
so I can update you once I know. And Councillor Rice has his hand up as well.
See that. Okay, Councillor Rice.
Yes, Chair. Probably a question for Lee. Would it be possible in the next meeting, Lee, to come forward with a further report on the white paper planning reforms? Because they will be quite crucial.
Thank you, Chair. I guess it depends on what announcements are made, really. Our response to the white paper was, I'm trying to remember which meeting we discussed this at, but it was certainly just before, I think it might have been just before Christmas. We provided that overview of where we were with that. Our response went in, Sean might remind me, but I think it was around October time. That was the council's response to the white paper, and we've yet to have an announcement. I guess the government have other things going on at the moment, but as soon as we receive that, then obviously we'll pick that up, and then certainly we'll make sure that task force are kept into that conversation. Sean, I don't know if you wanted to add anything more to that.
Just a couple of things. I mean, Robert Jenrick, I think just before Christmas, said that the government was still considering the comments and would be coming back in the spring with its response. And I think the way he phrased it was that we shouldn't necessarily expect everything that was set out to be coming forward. I think the only thing that they've actually published since the announcement and publication of the white paper was revised housing figures for English local authorities. And I think the borough's housing target went up by 10 as a result of proposed changes to the standard methodology. But they've been very quiet since, obviously, as Lee said, because of the current situation.
Other things on their mind, Sean, definitely.
Yeah.
Councillor Rice, did you want to come back?
No, that's fine, Chair. That's good.
Okay. Has everybody had their say? If anybody else want to say anything at all? Your last chance. Okay, thank you, everybody. Wendy, anything else you want to add?
No, that's it, Chair.
Right. Okay. Thank you, everybody. And
Good.
I know we keep saying it, but please stay safe. You know, I don't want to repeat all the things that we're supposed to be doing, but just stay safe altogether. Okay.
Good night, all. Thanks for having us.
See
Bye.
Thanks,
you
Chair.
Wednesday.
Thank you, members.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye. Thank you.